Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So last week we started on chapter 1 and we mentioned that we would divide it into two halves. So here we are today for the second half of chapter 1, the Bhagavad Gita. And with us we have Michael Bohuslav, philosopher, who is going to take us through this. You might remember that last week at the end we came up with a little exercise that we could watch our lives and look for those moments where we were experiencing sort of stress or strain, or we felt some internal challenge. So really just a reminder for yourself, did you remember to do that in the week? Or if not, just remember that each session we will have a little reminder or exercise, something that we can practically work upon each week as we're going through this learning journey, just so we start to relate the intellectual concepts to how it is we're behaving, acting, responding, interacting with this world around us. But we've got a lot of material to cover. So Michael, over to you and take us through it.
All right, thank you very much, Jacqui, and hello again to all the listeners. I hope you've been well and are still continuing with us, and we'll finish off chapter 1 today. So I mentioned at the beginning of this chapter that there were two themes running through the first chapter of the Gita. And the first theme is pretty straightforward. It's describing a battle between two lots of cousins. They're fighting over an ancient kingdom in India. So there's wealth, of course, that goes with that, and power and prestige and all of this. And we've gone through that, so I won't cover that again. But this second theme that the rest of the Gita is going to focus on is that there's a battle taking place within each individual. That's all 8 billion people on the planet. They might know, most people don't think that there's a battle taking place within them, but as this podcast unfolds, I'll try and make it more clear as to what that battle is and why it's referred to as a battle. So we're shifting now from that physical setting of a battlefield with two armies to an internal battle that's taking place within each individual. And that's also got two armies, and they're briefly here, just quickly called, one's an ego and one's a buddhi, or your good side of you, or the not so good side of you, the truthful side or the not truthful side. So there's lots of different ways of describing these two aspects that are within us, each and every human being. And the more familiar we are with who we're fighting and why we're fighting, well, then that gives us an advantage as to how we could end up coming out victors by the time we finish chapter 18. So just to lead into from the one theme into the second, I'm just going to refer to some advice that Arjuna was given just prior to the battle. And one of the people who was offering him some advice was his own mother, Kunti. Now, she says to him, and I'll just read briefly from a few notes I made, she advises her sons not to be fools and that they had every right to wage war against their cousins and rightfully reclaim their kingdom. After all, they had cheated on them, even tried to assassinate Arjuna's entire family, and had totally reneged on their contract. And we see many of these things taking place in our everyday lives, don't we, Jacqui? Partners and married couples who make contracts. Sometimes they get broken, and then there's a lot of disputes take place. You have a contract at work, or a company takes over your company, and you're dismissed under the new regime. So there's a conflict takes place of losing a battle. People get very upset or angry. Loss of income, of course, having to find new jobs. So all of these battles are constantly taking place around us, but we don't refer to them as battles at the time, but in actual fact they are. So we're just going to look at how it's subtle in the one sense, or physical in one sense, but also taking place constantly across the planet with each individual. So she gives him advice. She's given him advice there just on what you'd call a family advice, or advice a parent gives to children, or husbands to wives, or people at work, and this sort of stuff. So it's from a mortal sort of aspect. But the next person that gives him advice is Krishna himself. And Krishna, being, of course, the immortal being, gives him a much wider sense of advice, not just pertaining to some particular activity. So we're venturing now into the realms of righteous and unrighteousness, morals and ethics, and all of these sorts of things that should be applying in our lives, but are often pushed to the side by ego. So Krishna inspires the Pandava lads, being led by Arjuna, of course, that they were lawful people and that the law of righteousness was on their side. So you can see we go to a broader concept, the actual law, and it's not just human law, but it's actually talking about God's law. So we need to come to an understanding eventually that there is such a concept as God's laws. So you have a duty to do what he says. So there's references to duty now coming into it. The Kauravas aren't fit to rule a country. Well, he's saying there really that the ego is not fit to rule your country. Okay, so you can see the wider implications that are being presented by Krishna here, and he says you must save the people from these villains, even by fighting if necessary. So that is saying not just save yourself from those villains, but then you'll be of more help to saving all your loved ones from the villains that are there as well, unjustly trying to claim their kingdom as well. So this is the background situation that created the battle and the war, which is now about to begin. So anything you'd like to say here, Jacqui, or will I just continue on?
Yes. Well, I'm just thinking it's interesting because, as you said earlier, we all as human beings have a lot of problems and issues. We probably think of it as stress and strain and life issues, not necessarily a battle. I even think over the past week, I had some unexpected news. It was confronting. I watched myself internally kind of tense up like a ball of steel wool. But at no point in my mind, like I could feel myself going into this awful kind of stress response that wasn't useful and I didn't like being in it. But at no point did I really think to myself, it's a battle. So it's curious, isn't it? I feel like for a lot of us as Westerners, this notion of a battlefield, we don't often think of our pain and suffering in that way. So I think people will be interested to hear why they said it, or why this story begins on the battlefield, because you're right, we all do face internal battles, but we don't necessarily use that terminology or think of it in that way.
Well, we couldn't have scripted, I had no idea you were going to share that example, Jacqui. And if we were sort of trying to sort out or plan this segment or any of these podcasts, which we obviously don't do, but we don't do, it mightn't be obvious, but we don't. But we couldn't have, from hearing you say that, we couldn't have scripted it any better, in that was a classic example of what I'm been saying or trying to say, that and that's what the rest of the teaching is all about. We're done with this battle on Kurukshetra with the armies. I'll still refer to it a bit here, but the rest of it's going to be situations like you've just so clearly outlined. And I'd bet every cent I've got that everyone that's listening to this podcast can all relate to everything you said in one way or another. They'll obviously have different names. It'll be a slightly different thing that's triggered it for them, but the same emphasis that you were making, how you tensed up and you felt under stress and all the rest of it. Well, these are all battle-like situations, Jacqui. So that was excellent, and just really leads me nicely into the next part of what I had planned for this session. So I think I'll just keep on continuing.
Please do.
but that's a very relevant and personal example of what I'm trying to get across and what the actual teaching's trying to get across. Beautiful, really good. All right, so an important question might arise here for some of you, which is what Jacqui was just alluding to. Why is this great teaching set that's delivered in the Gita set on a battlefield? Like, it's unusual to have this great teaching set on a battlefield. And so I'm just going to give you a quick quote from one of the Gitas I've got by Swami Chidbhavananda. And in his commentary, he explains this whole situation about the setting on a battlefield for this great teachings. He says, Vedanta, or self-knowledge, is born of Shanti, peace. The ancient rishis or sages resided in forests or mountain retreats and made calm inquiries into the fundamental principles governing life. The Upanishads had their origin in these quiet settings. But the Bhagavad Gita occupies a peculiar place. It did not emanate in the woods or in these quiet settings. A war front, a battlefield, was the place of its origin. An exciting setting was deliberately chosen by the Lord. I'd like to emphasize that. This battlefield, exciting and full of go-go and all ups and downs and ins and outs, was deliberately chosen by Krishna to pass on his teachings. And he describes it a bit. So he sets it as an example regarding the attitude that one should assume towards one earthly life or journey. He reminds Arjuna that earthly mundane existence is a veritable warfare. He says nothing here on earth is achieved without a fight. Now, you just gave a classic example, Jacqui, in your sharing, right? Can you relate to that? Mm. So he goes on to say that, I now go on to posing a question to everyone. Well, the last line I read was, nothing here on earth is achieved without a fight. Without a fight. Well, I ask you, I'll put it to you. That's correct, isn't it? That's correct. And I'll just elaborate a little bit in case you're sort of hesitant or still thinking, well, oh, is it or isn't it? Well, we'll have a listen to some of this. He says, so think about it as I read through these few little examples that I've jotted down. We fight to be born. That's an unusual comment to make, isn't it? But there's difficulties with childbirth with in lots of cases, aren't there? And there's even, unfortunately, sometimes death at birth. So right from birth, it's a fight. It's even a fight in the womb, if you want to go sort of deeper, especially if there's 2 or 3 in there. But won't dwell on that. But then the rest of our life, we're fighting for shelter, for food, for clothing, for education, for love, for approval, for friends, for wealth, for power, prestige, security, health, holidays, sport, hobbies, so on and so on and so on. Everything's a fight. If you want to win a gold medal, you've got to fight pretty hard, don't you, against all your opponents. You've got to make huge sacrifices in your life. If you want to be the world ballerina, best ballerina, pianist, countless hours of practice, all of these things. It's a constant battle. And you have to set aside other things that aren't so important to you to focus on, was it important? Well, this is going to be the entire teachings of the Gita. Looking at what's important in our lives and what's not so important, get rid of the junk and focus on the truth, on what's really important or relevant in our lives.
They're important points, because I'm just thinking, like I'm trying to encapsulate who I imagine our listening audience is going to be as we release these podcasts. And I think, again, the terminology is still not something we're used to. We're used to being told, or we're used to the notion that there'll be challenge in life, but we're also often sort of promised at this broad societal level, or even through illusionary things like Hollywood movies. The promise is often happiness. You'll get happiness through family, good career, through wealth, a nice home, through your children, through your partner. And so we actually, I think a lot of the times, even if we're reasonably aware and we have done some spiritual study, it's so infiltrated in us as human beings, I think, that we're promised, if we could just have these certain things, the promise of goodness and happiness and all of these things will come. And so I don't know, even for a lot of people, even for myself, hearing you say that, and I've studied reasonably in this area, I think the terminology is going to take people a little while to catch up with, because there's still part of us that thinks the promise is the promise, and if we can just get a few things right in our life, that happiness is going to come. Whereas I think the older we get and the more we journey, we start to realize that there are no promises and guarantees, that illusionary things like wealth and status and family scenarios don't actually always, or they're not guaranteed to bring everlasting happiness. So yeah, not sure if I have a final point in any of that, but more just to share that there might be a little catch up with our audience in just the terminology and really coming to grasp this. And I suspect that will be an ongoing learning as we continue with the journeyings week upon week, month upon month.
Yeah. No, you're spot on, Jacqui, and everything you're saying. And these are, we discussed at the start that you'd be sort of like the bridge or the link between me and the listeners. And by asking these questions or the comment or giving the comment that you made at the start of the session, you're playing your role beautifully in that link. And I wouldn't have elaborated on what you're sort of raising as a question now in what I've got here. But it's well worth elaborating on. So with 30 years of teachings, I've discovered, I have discovered clearly that language is an important thing. And if people look searching for truth, they'll come across people who, like grasshoppers, they hop from one group and teacher to another group and teacher to another group and teacher, not realizing that eventually you could spend your whole life doing that and never find answers to the questions you want. Because by the time it takes a year or two to be with a person to get used to the way they say things. It's not just the words, but even the emphasis and so on. So there's lots of people, well, not lots, but there are a number of people that are teaching the Gita, including myself, but we have different emphasis on how we say it. And, some emphasize one aspect more and others another aspect. Well, that just comes through your nature and your personality. So all I can say to the listeners is that if you're hearing any words that I'm saying, and sometimes they might jar with you or just come out of the blue and you've never heard it or thought about it, and he goes in there instantly saying, oh, this is all nonsense, he doesn't know what he's talking about, stop listening. Well, all I can say is you've got to have courage and you've got to have some faith in your own self. And I talked about this resonance last week, didn't I, Jacqui, about listening and seeing if what I'm saying in these podcasts, for example, but anywhere you go, as to whether it's resonating with you. And by resonating, see, that's a word that most people don't understand either in this. But that resonance means that my higher aspect saying what it's saying at this moment, if your higher aspect is tuned into it, it'll pick up on that and it'll resonate. And so the person will instantly know. They don't have to be told or anything. Hey, that sounds true. That I mightn't know it all, but that sounds true. And so that's that resonance. And then you just stick with that and keep going. But on a bigger picture, and I'll finish on this, is that you mentioned about movies and life in general promises things. Our husbands and wives promise things. Our employers promise things. The government promise, like we're having elections soon, they're all promising left, right and centre. We know that most of it's not going to come true. We know even that most of what people that closest and dearest promises probably is not going to come true, or there's going to be elements missing or something. But interestingly enough, that in the Thursday group currently studying the Gita down here at Torquay, we're nearly onto chapter 9, and I've given them a little bookmark laminated by one of the ladies who does calligraphy and that. She did a beautiful job on it. But it's a beautiful quote on the end of chapter 9. Anyone got a book, they can look at it at the end of the session. Chapter 9, last shloka, last verse. And when we buy a car, when we get anything, there's guarantees, little bits on the contract, but there's little bits down the bottom. So when you go to claim, oh no, that's not covered or something like that. Well, in this particular quote, Krishna is giving Arjuna, which is us, remember everyone, we're Arjuna, the seeker of truth. He's giving a ironclad guarantee from God to the individual human being, Jacqui. And he says, if you do this, and the little quote, I can't remember it all exactly, but it goes like, the emphasis in those chapters is on the higher consciousness, God or the divine aspect, and describing it and helping Arjuna get to know it. And so Krishna is saying to Arjuna things like, fix thy mind on me, surrender to me, devote yourself to me. All of these, half a dozen of these little concepts. And then he says, and assuredly you will become one with me. So he's giving an iron cast guarantee from God itself, the highest aspect, to the individual, that if you follow my teachings, if you understand them and you put them into practice, you will assuredly be one with me. meaning you will achieve the final happiness that you referred to. That's hardly on anyone's radar, this final happiness, that the final happiness is union or self-realization with the divine aspect. And so here we are, Jacqui, you get all guarantees from politicians, we promise you this, from car salesmen, from any aspect, restaurants, we guarantee you the gastronomical delight of your life, all of these things. And sometimes you're left pretty, a film, oh, this is the best film, that they've won 10 Logies. You go and see it and you think, oh, that was the late of so-and-so. Yeah. So, but this is a guarantee from God. And at the start, going back to your question you asked, is people have to have what's called Shraddha in Sanskrit, faith. It's not a blind faith, it's not a religious faith, it's this faith of resonance within. Once you feel you're in the right spot with the right people, you need to follow that. So the masters tell us, look around in the early stages of your journey. As soon as you sort of get a resonance with someone, then stop mucking around and get fed income and continue on as far as you can go with that group or that person.
Yes.
Is that making sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And I think for people on the beginning journey, it's worth keeping in mind that even if they're not necessarily seeking or understanding fully the notion of self-realization and all of that, that people are generally looking for a little bit of improvement in their life, and that is the least they can probably expect by going through some of this learning journey. But bigger possibilities are available.
Well, these 17 chapters that we're going to be looking at coming up now, there's the stepping stones. No one can go from where they are at the moment to that final point. And even that's only at chapter 9, halfway through the teachings. So it's gradual. It can't be done quickly. You've actually, many of the people who are tuning in already have actually been working on this in previous number of lifetimes and are getting stronger and building on it. And whatever you do in this lifetime will just, if you don't achieve that final reward of self-realization, you'll be much better equipped in the next lifetime to continue on from that higher level and just keep forging ahead.
Lovely, thank you.
All right, well, just glanced at the watch and time's marching on. So I think, I could go into more detail describing the battles that are taking place. There's people also battling to find cure for cancer, and, people are battling behind the scenes to achieve peace settlements. So there's all sorts of battles, not just fighting, but also trying to resolve fights and things like that. So I'd like to come on to the next aspect, which is describing the battlefield itself, which I did when I held up the, or which I touched on when I held up the book and showed the cover. So I'll just continue on, Jacqui, that the Bhagavad Gita teaches one to equip oneself for the battle of life. This is really what you've just been saying in your examples, the battle of life. The whole life's a battle. He said, I say the following 17 chapters will continue to expand on this theme. Without preparation, without this knowledge that you're now tapping into, the warfare called life cannot be waged successfully. If you don't know who your opponent is, you don't know who you're fighting. And so the difficulty for everyone is to get used to the term ego and understanding that that's the villain or the devil within us. Yeah. When Jesus says, "Get thee behind me, Satan," he's meaning get thee behind me, ego. And that, with the picture, it means get ego's hands off the reins and you take control as your higher self, your buddhi, your organ of discrimination that knows right from wrong and truth from untruth. The ego doesn't know those concepts, and it keeps taking you down the wrong path, steering your chariot down the wrong path, and so you're losing the battle for your own kingdom. So the battlefield at Kurukshetra was thus chosen as the appropriate pulpit for delivering this message. So it talks about two armies facing each other. Between them stands a chariot led by 5 horses. So I've referred to all of that. So when I was on the retreat, Jacqui and listeners, a wonderful, this was many years ago, I might add. I was fairly new to it all. I had a wonderful experience regarding this battlefield, which I'd like to share, Jacqui, with our listeners. So while on this retreat, my tutor referred to a quote from Shakespeare's The Tempest in response to a question. So I've mentioned here Shakespeare, right? And you think, well, Shakespeare doesn't come in, but Shakespeare was actually a great philosopher. And in one of his works, The Tempest, the tutor, as I say, made a reference to a part of that. And I'd like to share these words and expand on them very clearly, just 3 lines. The quote is that their understanding begins to swell, and the approaching tide will shortly fill the reasonable shores that now lie foul and muddy. And in that instant, or before I go on within that instant, I'll just elaborate on that a little bit. So their understanding begins to swell. That was where I was at that stage of my journey. I was wanting to understand more, and it was there sufficient enough to have me on a retreat, but I was wanting it to swell more, wanted more and more. So many of our listeners, I'm sure, will be able to relate to this to some degree or other. And he says, so as it's like a wave on the ocean. Just a little wave at this stage, my understanding was beginning to swell, and the approaching tide will shortly fill the reasonable shores. So those waves can get bigger, can't they? So by the time there can almost be a tsunami when it lands on the shore. But we also have noticed at different times when we've been down to the beach after a storm or whatever, sometimes there's the water's foamy on the edges, it looks discoloured, can even be a bit smelly. Yeah, so that's that reference to where our life is sort of like a foul and muddy sort of mess in one way or another. Sounds a bit gruesome, I know, but when you boil it down, that's there. Okay, so this tide of truth, this teaching that we're embarking on in the Gita, it washes away all of that untruths, those illusions that lie within us. It's like a cleansing. You know, we always associate water with cleansing. So I'll just go on to describe what happened to me then. So as I listened to these words, I instantly fell deeply still and found myself hovering over the battlefield at Kurukshetra, looking down at the scene unfolding below me. So I was that scene I showed on the book. I might just quickly show it again.
Show it again, because I think you and I were looking at this earlier, Michael.
Oh,
just
well,
I haven't. Just take it out a fraction, pull it back, take it back a little bit. Oh, yes, that's better.
Okay.
And maybe do you want to give a quick overview as to that image? I'm guessing that a lot of people will have seen that before.
Sorry, I got mixed up, Jacqui. I thought
you and me were looking at this in our discussions prior to starting the official podcast.
So you can see in the background the soldiers. You can see some elephants. The main focus is that I'll describe to you in my episode is the chariot. So that's our vehicle. Our body is called the vehicle or a chariot. The 5 horses represent our 5 senses. The vehicle's traveling on the road of desires, all of our likes and dislikes and expectations. You see Krishna's holding the reins. He's the higher self. In the chariot are 2 people. The other one's Arjuna. That's everyone listening. So I'm playing the role of Krishna. You're the listeners, Arjuna. And the reins are the mind. So who's controlling the mind, meaning mind and emotions? So I think that's enough, Jacqui?
Yes,
to give people an inkling on it. So I'd fallen deeply still, and I found myself hovering above the battlefield looking down. And as I looked down, I could just see thousands and thousands of soldiers from both armies as far as the eye could see. Some were on foot, some were in chariots, some were riding horses, some were on top of elephants, you know, the baskets and arrows, bows and arrows there, everything like that. There was an immense noise. There was horses neighing. There was generals shouting orders. There were conch shells blowing, trumpets blowing, drums beating. There was all the movement of the chariots and the mechanical things, you know, swords and spears against the shields. The noise was just tremendous. Thousands and thousands of men. I could literally smell the manure, horse manure, the elephant manure. I could smell the fear of the of all the soldiers, imagine you're going into battle and you're likely to die in the next 5 minutes. You know, the enormous amount of fear, the sweat and the fear, and also the energy of the bravery that's required, all of these sorts of things. It was just a extremely profound experience for me. And some of it I knew instantly. I knew that I'd partaken in an enormous battle just by looking at it there. It took a few more years of more knowledge and studying of the Gita itself to be able to explain it now, like I shared with you about Shakespeare's quote and how it all comes in. So it comes in from all sorts of different angles, but over the years it's crystallized in me clearly, that initial experience. So firstly, it gave me enormous strength when I saw that, because I sort of I experienced the victory already at that moment. This was just a few seconds. Yeah, all around me, people were still talking, but I was oblivious to all of that. I just, in that very, what's called a deep state of samadhi, had taken myself and gone back 5,000 years and looked down. And you, in those sorts of episodes, I know it's going to be hard for a lot of people, but yeah, it's useful. I think if you won't hear this story from many people, I can guarantee you, the sharing of experiences can be quite profound, and inspire people and things like that. But in hindsight, as I got more knowledge, as I say, it helped me understand, because I had that direct episode at that time. You keep going back to it, if you like, for reinforcement and for clarity and things like that. So
that's a useful sharing. Gee, it makes me well, not think, but just reflect on the fact that no wonder then you're so drawn to this. Out of all the spiritual texts you could be teaching, no wonder that this has been such a significant part of your teaching life over the past 15 years in particular.
yeah,
like there's obviously a very powerful connection and link there, which I'm sure we could talk about for a lot longer, but I think just important to note. I think another point I'd like to make also is, I know certainly in the years that I've spent teaching yoga and running workshops and retreats, is that it's not uncommon for people to start having little experiences like you're just saying there, well, either little or bigger and more profound. And particularly in the beginning, people can often be a little bit taken aback as to what the experience is or what they're having. But I think it serves as an important reminder that as we do the work, as we intellectually learn, as we perhaps have practices such as yoga or meditation, deep breathing, those sorts of things, they do start to awaken other capacities in us. They do often provide little momentary insights or awarenesses or experiences that might feel a little otherworldly. And I know certainly I've had people come up to me and say, something just happened, and they relay their experience, and they're sort of looking like, is that normal? Should I be frightened and fearful? It's often good to give people some context around this, which you've just done as well in that sharing. So yeah,
again, a relevant point. Yeah, I'm not. I think people would know I'm not sharing that to boost myself or something like that. That's the last thing on my mind. It's exactly what you're saying. And just on that point, don't anyone be thinking that you've got to have that experience. There might be no one else on the planet has that experience, and it doesn't matter. It's just one experience I've had, and you've just alluded, Jacqui, that we all start off having smaller experiences, in inverted commas. Any experience is profound if it's a spiritual experience, because you've transcended your mortal self. But they do take on more profound qualities as the person advances. It's just living proof for the person then to keep pursuing the journey that they're on, knowing that that's that strongest resonance you can have, that I was referring to, when you have it as a personal experience. Well, look, time's marching on, Jacqui, and so I'd just like to finish off with a couple of quick lines to wind it all up, if that's okay.
Of course.
So that's the whole reason for this setting of this chapter 1. As I mentioned right from the word go, because of the time restraint on these sessions and to get through a massive work, we can only touch on, the very fundamentals. I feel happy that we've done that, and would just like to finish off with a couple of lines saying that So Arjuna is at this point now. He's ready to fight the battle. Well, he thought he was ready to fight the battle, but in the early part of next podcast, we'll see that he's come in gung-ho. He's had the words of advice from his mother Kunti and from Krishna, and so he's all fired up. But as he's looking at it all, ego gets in again, creates a huge amount of self-doubt, and he becomes literally a emotional, mental sort of wreck, and refuses to fight, which that's the first part of chapter 2. So I'll touch on that next week. So, but just to sort of tidy up this one, so he says, or I've just made this note, but now on the eve of his biggest battle, he begins to tremble as self-doubt begins to overcome him. So we leave Arjuna now at the end of chapter 1, a total mental and emotional wreck, totally confused, hesitant, uncertain, fearful, and full of doubt. He's at a major crossroad in his life. And so, Jacqui, for the exercise for this week for the listeners, last week I asked, see if you can, or reflect on if there were bits of turmoil in your life in the past when you felt upset or angry or, were ready to give up, all these sorts of things. So you elaborated on that at the beginning. Well, this is because it's the same chapter, of course, it's a similar sort of exercise. But what I'd urge listeners to do is have a serious look at your situation where you are in life at the moment, and ask yourself, are you sort of feeling, or have already been feeling for a while, that you're at some sort of major crossroad in your life? Do I turn left? Do I turn right? Do I keep sort of going as I'm going? Sometimes it's referred to in current vernacular a midlife crisis, and that could be happening, but this exercise is really on a deeper level than that. So you could be going through a marriage upset or partnership relationship upset. Could be changing your business affairs or your career changing, all of these sorts of things. Children have grown up and left home, and now you've got some me time. What am I going to do with my life now that, to fill the void? It can take shape in any way or form. So have a look, close look. And don't let ego say to you, please, don't let ego say to you, everything's cushy and rosy in my garden. Look a bit deeper than that, yeah? Don't try and let ego hide in your situation. Don't go looking and making up for things, obviously, but be truthful with yourself. And if you've, so simply the exercise is to reflect on that. And if you find, or if you're feeling that you are at some sort of crossroad in your life, the next question is, that you need to ask yourself is, well, what am I going to do about it? Okay. And hopefully you'll tune in next week, and we'll continue on, and I'll give you some suggestions, some advice from the great master, Krishna.
Such important words. While we were talking about battlefield and making the comments that some of that terminology might be new and a little bit more difficult to grasp, I think those more recent words you used there in the last few minutes, certainly everyone can relate to in some way, shape or form. Emotional havoc and strain and things like that. Like even the happiest of us that have lives that we would describe as good overall, or, traveling well in general, we all know that turmoil that you were speaking of. So hearty topics indeed to be getting into and exploring.
All right. Well, thanks, Jacqui.
I've got
no more to say. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Love to you all. Keep well, and I hope you rejoin next week. Thank you, Jacqui.
Perfect.
Great. Well, very well done. Beautiful.
Thank you so much, Michael, and we'll see you next week.